Okay, friends, we will start with the conference of today. I remind you, please turn off your microphones so that we do not hear all your personal noises. I remind you we're in the cycle of conferences of the Center for Chinese-Mexican Studies, and this cycle is coordinated by Professor Yolanda Trápaga, Delfín, and myself. Before beginning with the conference of today, I would simply like to remind you, on the one hand, that the Schwarzman Scholarship started in these weeks and will go on for the next weeks for all the students, professors. I would simply like to highlight the importance of this very competitive scholarship. Luckily and increasingly in the last years, a growing number of Latin American scholars and students and young professionals have been starting to participate in this scholarship. Please inform your students and young scholars that could do so. I would also like to remind you that the Academic Network for Latin America and the Caribbean on China, RETA-LC, will hold its 5th international seminar from June 14th to June 16th. We will have more than 130 presentations in 3 days. Again, everything by Zoom. Please look at the program of the network. I'm very sure you will find topics of your interest. No? Today, we are very happy to have Professor Wolfram Elsner from the University of Bremen in Germany. I'm very thankful to Wolfram for his time and for being so kind in having a brief but intense interaction in the last weeks and months. I remind you, Professor Elsner has been a visiting professor in several universities in China, also in other places, but our issue of interest is China. He has been the president of the European Association for Evolutionary Political Economy, and he's the member of the editorial board of several journals, among others, in the world. No? And what is of particular interest for us, in remembering that we have held more than 300 conferences every 2 Wednesdays since 2005. No? What is of our particular interest is that Wolfram has also been the author in the last years of a group of texts that have received a very positive support in Germany and in Europe on China's economy. No, one of his last books in German, but also in English, is the Germans, not the German, the Chinese century. Sorry for the error. The Chinese century, the new #1 is different, no? Which is a provocative, I think, invitation to read the book and to say, well, what's the difference? No? Wolfram will talk about this in his presentation, and I remind everybody, including Wolfram, we usually have presentations of around half an hour, 45 minutes with some flexibility, and another half an hour or 45 minutes of questions and exchanges. All the questions, please, are sent by the chat, not in video, not in person. So I will inform you after 30 minutes, 40 minutes that the floor is open and that we can start sending questions. Wolfram, I assume that you have access to the chat. Otherwise, I can help you, and I can summarize some of the questions. No.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
again,
No, I have the chat function here, of course. Yeah.
fantastic.
But while talking, I will of course not look at the chats at the same time, but afterwards. Yeah. Okay.
So the floor is yours, Wolfram, and thank you very much for your time and for your afternoon in Germany.
Yes, thank you very much, Enrique. I very much appreciate and am happy to have this occasion to talk to you. I remember I was at UNAM, invited for a week or two or so. I had it was the microeconomics week or something like this 2 years ago, and I had to give 4 or 5 presentations to different audiences. PhD students and faculty, and to regular master students, etc. I had a very nice, very good time in Mexico City and at UNAM. So I remember very well. So thank you. Now technique. I have to share my my screen with you, and I hope it's working now.
We can see it perfectly.
You can see it. Good. So the question was, the title was, why and how is China the #1? I've changed that drastically by changing why and how. So I start with how is China the #1, in what sense? And then proceed to trying to explain why is this the case. So subtitle, you see some economic, ecological, and social aspects. I would have, of course, as you know, China, starting with China, you can talk for days and days and weeks, forever. I picked some aspects and probably will not go into them all because of the time restriction. China #1, how? In what sense? Quantitatively, qualitatively, I probably have to skip over the poverty thing, or at least go only briefly into that slide. Social security would be one aspect, and labor rights. And then I will put the question why. So my explanation is that they have developed from learning through history, and from own bad experience. They have learned incredibly much, and they have succeeded to develop something that is absolutely new. In particular, I will focus on the new state-market relation. Markets regulated, but not regulated to death, but regulated to agility. Okay, so productive forces and the system, productive forces and production relations, that would be the question here. Just one slide, very briefly. I give you an example of the recent 14th 15-year plan, just decided by the National People's Congress in last March, the 14th 5-year plan. And then I go into the questions of ecology, which is particularly exciting. Most of that you probably know. Then briefly the question of what about the billionaires in that system? And I give you a brief example on the Alibaba Ant Group case that is also just has been topical in the last few months. Okay, and in the end, kind of crash test list. Why is this the case? What kind of system is able to do all that? You know, is it socialism? Is it turbo capitalism? Whatever. So here you have a list of some 10, 12 pragmatical questions and issues where you can judge yourself. Now, how? In what sense? By the numbers, quantitatively. The GDP in purchasing power parity, China is #1 already since 2016. So that means purchasing power parity means first they put it on the same, they put the GDPs of the US and China, for instance, on the same footing with in dollars, just on the currency parity, and then check the purchasing power parity. How much can each people purchase with that number of dollars. Okay, so and the Chinese people since 2016 can purchase more for their dollars than the U.S. Population can purchase for their dollars, and that has to do with the fact that particularly the U.S. GDP is inflated through asset inflation. Particularly, everything. In particular, the housing is extremely expensive, and it generates high incomes, which is more or less inflated financial income, more or less. So it inflates the U.S. GDP. So no wonder that the Chinese can purchase more for a certain number of dollars than the U.S. In a few years, China will be also the number one in regular GDP, and GDP just transformed and made comparable in currency parities. That was usually expected for 2030. Now Bloomberg says after Corona, the capitalism is struggling with it still, and China made it within 2 months and is going up again. So this is two years, 2020, 21, extraordinary years, which, however, zoom closer the point of time when China will be number one in currency parities, GDP in currency parities. Bloomberg says 28. Now, the Standard Chartered Bank in the UK, which does every second year, I think, a country rankings, they had something in 2019 saying in 2030, the forecast would be China 64 trillion, US 31. So this is exciting. You see, it's already in 2030, they expect to have more, China to have more than double of the US. In that sense, in the 2020s, this year we are living, this decade we are living in, is the final turn of the tide in the global structure, and this is simply just the new global normal, which first is inevitable. Washington can struggle as much as it can. The Western media may do China bashing as much as they can. It will not change anything. All the factors that you analyze as an economist, if you go into education, if you go into social mobility, social mobilization, engagement of people, social trust of people, happiness even of people, technology, of course, all that, wherever you go into analysis, go into the studies that are existing, you will see all the factors China has are set for a further increase into the number one, and they will go far, far ahead into the number one. There will be a number one and then for a long time, nothing will follow. Not even India, not even the US. Okay, so this is simple. One of the results of my analysis over the last several years. And second, this is just the return of an old historical normal. For at least 2,000 years, China contributed 30 to 40% of the world GDP. And this is what we will have in the next 10, 20 years around. Henry Kissinger was very clear about that. He said, well, what can we do? We cannot do anything. 2011, he said, look, 1,800 years of 2000 that I have the data on here, China was contributing 30 to 40% of the world GDP. And he must know, because he had, of course, the best data available, being the foreign minister of the US. Now, another story is the GDP per person. Now, China has only $11,000 per person per year, which is just the ranking. I have that steering tablet over here. Okay, so I can move it away. Good. Yeah, it just entered the group, the World Bank definition of the group of upper middle income countries. And they say just at the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, which will be celebrated this summer, this year, 21, we just want to be a humbly wealthy country. And they have attained it, okay, in that sense. But in GDP per person, they have rank 59, you know, in currency parities. A huge history. They jumped up 56 ranks since 2000, but nevertheless, that is nothing. That is far from being number one. Does China want to become number one in GDP per person? Oh, someone has his microphone open. No, it doesn't. Tulio Arroyo, close your micro. So no, it doesn't want, because it's at the edge of this discussion that we have in the West for decades. The Greens and all the discussed that all, you know. China nowadays is the country that that question.
Sorry about that.
Okay, now he's off. Yeah, China is the country that questions the GDP as such, and it started already measuring its performance in United Nations Human Development Index, and now you might have read that introduced as an experiment in several provinces. Shenzhen, for instance, the south, started with a gross ecological product to one day to substitute the GDP, and she repeatedly said something like, we don't want a model of excessive consumption. We don't want to go that way, you know. So the new discussions you have in China is on new green lifestyle, is on changing, modernizing social behaviors, going off from the traditional consumption lifestyle model, etc., etc. So they discuss about what to eat. They discuss about halving down the consumption of meat, for instance, into the up to 2030, etc., etc. What to drink, soft drinks or water, new animal ethics, etc., etc. All these things going on in current discussions in the media and social media in China. I have in both books that are out, first book was mentioned last year, just some weeks ago. The second is out. I have different chapters on what is going on in the grassroots, deep structure of Chinese society in terms of discussions and behavioral change, which is important, you know. So in 49, the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic as such, they do not want to be the richest country, but the definition is prosperous, wealthy country, not the richest, because the GDP grows till then, and the GDP per person will be completely irrelevant at that time. And China is going exactly that way and pushing the entire discussion. Now, in the documents, government, party, National People's Congress, wherever you look at, they have the Chinese dream. And you see, you know, all the documents about qualities, about ecology, about joint future of humankind, about social trust, about the campaigns of credible China, the campaigns of rule of law, discussions about future forms of democracy, happiness even, you know. Sometimes you read these documents and you think, wow, that have been the Greens 30 years ago in Germany, you know, but the Greens never made it, but they changed themselves completely into Cold War warriors, you know, so they forgot everything. But it is kind of time warp for me, you know, because in the 70s or 30, 40 years ago, that was exactly the discussion that we had here with the Greens. Now, I look at the 14th 4 years plan. For the first time, they don't have any quantitative growth targets anymore. This is a sign. in what I said. Okay. Beyond all that, there is one more important thing. Why is China number one? Not because of the GDP and purchasing power parities, as said, or in some years in currency parities. That is not the point. The point is that from there, simple $11,000 per year per person, they have a leverage, a qualitative leverage into quantities, if you want, into performances in all areas that never has been experienced anywhere in the modern world. It's unprecedented. So that is the point, and that is my argument. So see the following slides where you, I hope, get this impression. I have to shift this tablet all the time because it covers a lot of my text. Now let's see, where am I? Here, shift that. Yeah, the end of poverty. You know that I don't have to explain much about it. December 2020, UNDP and Chinese government said now end of poverty officially. 800 plus million people since 78. They made up for 75% of the global poverty reduction. Why isn't it going anymore? Okay. The last 100 million poor people since 2012, which is 13 million per year, is out of poverty. That was the hardest mile, so to speak. The last mile is always the hardest one because it's easy with a general growth pull. You can easily bring people out of poverty, but the sediments, you know, the baselines, the bottom poors are those most difficult to bring out, and that was a huge effort to go into remote mountain areas, into mountain valleys with many ethnicities, very traditional people, etc., etc. So it required a huge interdisciplinary effort, as you can read on the UNEP and UNDP websites. It's all explained what they did for different ethnicities or villages. They made, you know, sophisticated plans for them. The rural development, the rural catch up in China is taking place since the 2010s already. Very dynamic, but that was only one part of the story. To bring them glass fiber or fast internet, or give them the iPads or the computers, etc., the notebooks, or bring them specialized e-vehicles, the little scooters, the little mini trucks, the little cars, one-seat cars, three-wheel cars, four-wheel cars, two-seat cars, etc. The other thing, and that was the core point, is to develop with the villagers, with the peasants, what they can do to grow particular products, you know, and marketize them, learning to marketize them with the computer and with their fast internet, to bring them to the market. As you know, Chinese farmers may on their own may sell their specialized products, and therefore Alibaba has that Taobao platform. And here it was the point, in the end, to qualify I just have to shift these panels all the time. To qualify these people, the peasants and the poor people, to qualify to get them a sustainable business plan for the villages. Okay, so I leave it with that. A final note on that: the World Bank poverty lines are for lower middle income countries are $3.20 per day per head. and China fulfills this poverty line. But in the meantime, when doing that, they had entered the upper middle income class already. So it's an ongoing effort in China, and they are absolutely aware of that they have further to increase the minimum daily income. And the formal line would be 5.50 per day. And that is something that they will easily, let's see, it doesn't move. My slides doesn't move. What is going on? Okay, here we are. It has to do with the panels that are somewhere. Social insurance. I just make it further quick, most quickly. Unified social insurance system successively in the 90s, unified in 2010. From 11 to 18, in 8 years, they had 100% of the population health insured, which means they took into the public health insurance system 170 million people per year. You can imagine what kind of effort this is. Old insurance is around 1.2 billion members already. The 14th for 5 years plan says, shifting that table again, shifting the panel, a coverage of 95%, which means 1.33 billion people will be in the old age insurance in 25. Okay, they will have an issue with increasing the pension agents, of course, which are very low currently and will not be sustainable in that sense. But that is no problem in my view under general social security. Many people above female above 15 or females above 55 or males above 60 would want to be in the business and work. Very different situation than in remote capitalisms, like remote developing countries, say, or threshold countries like in Latin America, and even in Europe. Yeah, unemployment insurance, accident insurance, maternity insurance, etc. All mixed systems. Firms contribute plus state insurance plus complementary private insurance. That is usually the system. But it's very important to see that the firms in China have to carry much more, a much higher share of the wage sum for social insurance. 30 to 35% in Germany, they would make an entrepreneur's a capitalist revolution, if that was the case. They are far below 15%, probably far below 10%. That also means that from the capitalist side, it's end of cheap labor in China. And this is a nice citation on that. She repeatedly says China's safety is the social security of its working class, which I found impressive. Okay, labor rights, just one very quickly, briefly, unified labor law since 2008. ILO says it conforms to all our norms. But now we have a discussion in the Western media. China has only signed 4 out of 8. The US has only signed 2 out of 8, which is more important. So the Greens, which will be the government next year in Germany, they will probably stop making a trade exchange with the USA because they say we cannot do anything with China because it has not signed all the International Labor Organization agreements. Okay, most strikes in the world, interestingly, but they don't strike for higher wages mainly, because was, if you look at the wage increase, it was 8 to 12% anyway. They strike for interesting things, for increasing social insurance contributions of the employers, or sometimes for higher investments and innovations, etc. So, usually supported by the Communist Party base organizations, and German companies complain sometimes about politicization, but they stay in China anyway. And all the surveys of companies, Western companies in China, done by European Chamber of Commerce in China, by American Chamber of Commerce in China, they all say increasingly good conditions of investment. We stay here. 98% of American companies, even early this year, have said, no, we will stay in China. They were asked, would you consider going back? 2% said yes, we would consider going back because of the better taxes now after Trump, and because of the customs, the higher customs. But 98% for 98% will change nothing. So labor conflict settlement, interesting. In the company, in the first instance, chaired by the trade union, if and you get an immediate proceeding. If you feel not properly ruled, then you can go to the regular labor court. So that means a part of the state already dissolves its court system, for instance, in that case, into society. So in the lower level, state dissolves into society, which is an interesting thing for judging the system in the end. Now, why? State and market, a new relation of, I'm just shifting the panels all the time. A new relation of productive forces and relations of production resulting, because they have learned from old Eurocentric socialism of poverty. And for the first time, we see something like a socialism of wealthiness, not richness in that sense, but some moderate and humble wealthiness, as it is supposed to go on into the 2040s and 50s then. Anyway, they trigger a high dynamic productive development, and Deng Xiaoping, I just remind you of that, knew very well Lenin's new economic policy, had a clear understanding of a new role for markets, small, medium-sized enterprises, entrepreneurs, startups, etc. It's a system that generates a financial surplus, and China can no longer be financially outcompeted or ruined, in the sense like the Soviet Union was ruined by financial competition through the hugely dominating a hegemonic system at that time. You know, the Soviet Union was more or less alone against the rest of the world, so to speak. This can never happen again. So it's the end of the crucial strategy of Washington to outcompete the competitor financially. That will no longer work. That's most important, I think. And what do they do? At the core, they have regulated market in a nationwide, embedded in a nationwide development perspective. And so they trigger a dialectic of letting go. So in the beginning, a regulation for a market, they let go for a long time, for several years. They observe the market, and they let the market participants learn. So it's a joint parallel learning about what can we do here. You know, I have explained that very long and extensive in my books on industrial policies in several sectors and industries, how it works. And at some point, they announce a new standardization and a consolidation, and who then meets the technological and organizational product standards, etc., will be in and will be has made it. Others have to leave, you know, and then another phase of letting go. This is an excellent application of what is already known, has been known for long, as Chinese experimentalism, and it leads to something that in the new literature is called China speed. Many millions of young entrepreneurs and startups is one of the results of that, and they are protected by the state banks. They will not be just purchased up by big business as soon as they have an interesting idea or so. And these people, not only these people, but also private households, they generate a huge sharing economy, which covers things, shared things that you cannot imagine. I mean, cars, computers, everything. The new role of state-owned enterprises, you all know that better than I. Has been reduced formally, quantitatively, but the qualitative role of the state-owned enterprises has increased hugely. That means they are technologically at the front. They push their industries in innovation, in investment, into directions, etc., etc. There's a new role for state-owned enterprises, a qualitatively new role for state-owned enterprises, and a qualitatively new role for the 4-year plans, which are mobilizing and no longer static, top-down, quantitatively fixing, detailed, regulating things, no longer. I will show that in a minute with the 14th 4-year plan. So in all, they somehow made it to generate high general social trust, you know. So the social trust, people tend to trust themselves, and the US universities have gone for many decades into China and are doing every year surveys on general trust, and they increasingly showed over the 2010s that China is a leading country in general trust of people. That has to do with information flows, etc. No, the information flow is something that belongs to the regulated markets, to the agile markets and experimentalism. I have that flow of information and restrictive IPRs case in that e-mobility case in my books, where I show that the big car corporations, when I was there in 2019, in the summer 2019, the car corporations got together with their foreign joint venture partners, went to the Chinese government and said, look, all these hundreds of small, medium-sized enterprises, they steal our patents. And the answer was, so it was the question, stop that, please. You know, they steal our patent. They just use our patents on batteries, on anything, you know. And the answer of the Chinese government was, and at that morning, everyone came up to me. Have you read that? Have you read that? Look here, they said this, and they were laughing all the time. You know, they were enjoyed that. And the government's answer was, if they steal something of you, get together with them and talk about the compensation, you know. And then the last phrase of the government's response was, information have to flow. You know, ideally for a heterodox economist, I would say, wow, yeah, that was it, you know, perfect. Okay, now the 5-year plans, generally, as said, no longer top-down static prescriptions, now operationalizations of the grand ideas: poverty, Belt and Road, social credit systems. I would have another set of slides on that, but leave that for today. The campaigns on credible China, rule of law, civil code book, you might have heard about the 1,000 paragraphs new civil code book with huge rights for individuals, etc. The planned growth rate reduction, the zero export surplus idea, and now the dual circulation. I come to the dual circulation as an example now. Now, the 14th 4-year plan, in addition to questioning the GDP growth as such, has no longer targets, quantitative growth targets, because of times have got uncertain. You know, the more aggressive, less reliable a US partner, the semiconductor shock, the Huawei shocks, the ZTE shock, TikTok shocks, all that shocks, you know, that where China was trusting to agreements, but was shocked by the disruptive strategy of the Trump administration. So they decided this no longer will happen to us. This will no more happen to us. So we will prepare to a different world now. And that's what they do. The result is the dual circulation conception in the 14th four-year plan. You have read that in the newspaper, certainly. It means two things: the strengthening of the interior economy. And by 2035, they will be able to produce any good they need, from basic food to semiconductors. That's for sure. You can trust on that. That will be the case in 10, 15 years. Nevertheless, that does not mean that China will isolate itself off or decouple itself from the world trade. On the contrary, of course, they will do more cooperation. They will do more reglobalization after Trump. They will still support hugely the Belt and Road, etc. What is the solution of that? It is a seeming contradiction, but only seeming. The solution is what they do is that what we generally did since the 50s. I mean, capitalism did that. It's called intra-industrial trade. Okay, so we import cars and we export cars, you know, and Germany export Mercedes and we import little Toyotas. Okay, so the people who buy a Toyota, they would never buy a Mercedes. So that is so simple. That's how the world economy works, and that is simply something that China, on a new level now, is focusing on and organizing. I'm telling this because in the newspaper I read so much dumb stuff on that. Some people saying, famous people even saying, now you see China isolates from the rest of the world, they decouple themselves, etc. All stuff, all shit. Okay, now some little numbers on from the 14th five-year plan, 7% plus R&D expenses, which means a further operationalization of the Made in China 2025 program. Labor productivity will grow above GDP growth, so they have to avoid the so-called middle income trap. Given the high wage increases, the work time reductions, etc., you might care for further increasing incomes. But if you neglect the productivity base of all that, then you will run into the middle income trap, as has happened since the 50s and 60s with a number of Latin American economies. Just a few other things. Life expectancy will, in the next 5 years, further increase. Education years will further increase. Old age insurance, 95% coverage, I mentioned that. Urbanization rate will increase from 60.6 to 65, which just means 55 million more migrant workers will receive the urban hukou, which is an important thing, of course, because they can bring in their families, etc. And on top of that, around already more than 100 million people, migrant workers, have already returned back to their western provinces from the East Coast. Bullet train network will double to 70,000 kilometers, increasing numbers of doctors, kindergartens, old care, etc., etc. Okay, so ecology. How many times do I have, Enrique? I'm over.
I would say, what, 10 more minutes?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So ecology, two slides on ecology at coming to the end soon, and then the question of what kind of system is it. 14th five-year plans, they say the share of total land in China of forests will increase further from 24 to something above 23 to something above 24%, and that means the panel must be shifted, plus 11 million hectares additional forests in 5 years. That is the size of South Korea, okay? They plant another forests in the size order of South Korea's land. And they increase the number of specialized national parks, national diversity areas, etc., etc. Also, as you know, the big UN diversity conference will be in October this year in China. And China has just at the beginning of this year doubled the length of the species protection list to 1,000 or so actively protected species. The afforestation is most impressive, I would say. NASA said in 2019, you can read that on their website, China, viewed from the space, is the greenest country in the world. And that shows that they have not just yesterday begun to forest up their country. That started in 1978 with the opening and reform period, Deng Xiaoping. And the original motivation was to stop the desert expansion and to stop the sandstorms that the northern central million cities always had. For thousands of years they had that. So they planted already more than 40 billion trees since 78. From another, I picked some important numbers, 2009 to 2019, 71 million hectares new forest, which is more than 25% of all new forests in the world since 2000. The only country that stopped the expansion of the deserts, says UNEP. But you probably know that a similar project now is going on in sub-Saharan area from east to west of Africa. They do the same, and as far as I know, successfully. And I heard that Chinese experts are there to help them with their experience. Now, the ecological civilization is everywhere. You read it everywhere, you hear it everywhere when you are in China, etc. I have the numbers in the books on how many CO2 millions of tons, dozens of millions of tons, these new forests absorb from the atmosphere. They have even changed the regional climate in the sense that in areas where it never rained in earlier times, it now rains, and farmers go into these mixed forests and can grow different fruits there, apples in extensive farming, apples and nuts and everything, So that is a new area and business for local farmers as well. They speak of I've seen and described in the books the new kinds of cities, woods in the cities, suburban areas, residential areas within woods, so to speak, new woods, new skyscrapers in it. In the 14th, 15-year plan, 170 zero-emission technology parks. I've described several of them, where they build houses from recyclable materials, natural materials, by 3D printing, etc., etc. They even think of reducing emission of computer centers. They stopped the Bitcoin mining farms in Inner Mongolia, where the power still was cheaper than everywhere else. And in the city of Ordo, you had a concentration of these farms, some of them illegal, and they found them in old industrial areas, left production sites, illegal things. If they found them by measuring the power consumption, and we found it was exorbitant. Greenpeace award to zero emission firms in China, Tencent and Shindata, etc. This social ecological mobilization is most interesting because it's an everyday thing of people. You might have heard of the Ant Forest app, something that Alibaba developed in 2016. Now they have more than 500 million users, and you can go with it, if you leave your car in the garage on the parking lot, take your bicycle or walk. If you go to the supermarket and screen one product and the blue map data, as mentioned here, they show you there's an alternative product with less ecological footprint, and you take this one with the less ecological footprint, then you get points. And at some point, it's a game, of course. You have a virtual tree, and you have to water it for some time, and then at some point, UNEP and NGOs engage there, plus state agencies. They plant a tree for you. And through this app, already 150 more than 150 million trees have been planted. They have just recently started banning one-way plastic completely, production, trade, consumption, everything. I talked to the 3D houses. You can get a train ticket by throwing 20 empty plastic bottles in the teller machine or in the ticket machine, etc. The reintroduction of the traditional rice-fish combination growing in South China, and so on and so on and so on. End the story. Energy is important. World leading in renewable energies, water, solar, wind, but they call also nuclear, they call also nuclear power new energies. So nuclear power is 5% now, will be 4% in 2034. And if you go further into their projections, it will further decrease. I don't tell now about the new types of nuclear power plants. Coal is also important. Similar things, millions of tons of coal mines have been stopped, and also coal power plants. The worst coal is off. They only take the best coal they have with the highest efficiency and new kind of coal plants. With the lowest emission, the so-called ultra supercritical. So if you are interested in coal at all, then go into that huge study of this organization, American Progress. They have analyzed the 100 largest Chinese coal power plants and the 100 largest US. And they say 90% of the Chinese are ultra supercritical, with around 50% of the emissions of the regular coal. And in the US, only 1% of the 100 largest are very, very new. So interestingly, they call that study, everything you think you know about coal in China is wrong. Interesting. Climate, to end up with that quickly, Paris Agreement fulfilled 3 years ahead. CO2 maximum in 2035, CO2 neutrality before 2016, 60. Everyone says China is the largest CO2 emitter. Yes, but per person, San Marino in Italy, a little state of 5,000 people, would otherwise be the most ecological state because they have little smallest population. So you have to count that per person, of course, and there China is ranked 36 and has half of the emissions of the USA.
Sorry, if you can start wrapping it up.
Yes, I will. Yeah. Good. So we have everything on that. It will further increase the energy emission efficiency. Mobility, yes, just one thing on mobility. It's no longer subsidized is regular e-mobility because of the batteries problem. They have now solar highways where induction power will draw the vehicles. Now, I will go over the Alibaba, the current Alibaba case, and now have my last slide and the last idea. What is it? What kind of system is it? Why can they do that all? No private property in just a list. I will not comment much about it. Just a list for everyone to check who is interested for him or herself. No private property in land and resources. You get just use rights, often very informal. Very many collective forms of property, from state-owned enterprises to rural township and village enterprises, cooperatives also in urban areas, very modern ones, huge sharing economy, the public sector, the public banks. Very interesting McKinsey studies, the long-run profitability of all the state-owned enterprises in China, of all the banks in China, of all the private corporations are in the long run clearly below the world average. You know, McKinsey is complaining about that, but I explain why this is the case and why this is intended. Redistribution back down, they had a very uneven distribution, 0.5 Gini coefficient. They are down to 0.43 and are going further down to 0.32. By beating corruption, by pushing on the profits, using the profits for infrastructure, etc., etc. Very interesting and very important, the social organization and mobilization. You know, the Sheku, the local basic residential organization forms, which had a huge role in the Corona lockdown. New kinds of interaction of state and market. I mentioned that. The anti-monopolistic policy, clear anti-monopolistic policy in the automobile sector and IT now. You heard about the Alibaba case, and they warned the leading 37 IT corporations. They called them in the competition and the competition office, and they warned them to change their contracts with the households to stop exploiting their monopolistic competition, make them more monopolistic position, make them more open. That means that the social trust of households is growing towards the government and towards people among them. I was off for a minute. Don't know what happened. A class or form of class transatlantic connection. But I was finished more or less. You see, my final phrase was just China has capitalism, but as a system, it is not capitalism. It is rather in the very first early stage of some kind of socialism that we still do not know. They go ways that humankind has never gone before. And yeah, food for thinking. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Wolfram, for your time and very interesting presentation. So if you can look at the chat, you will find a very wide group of different kind of questions. As a moderator, I will take the opportunity to begin with some questions, while in your multitasking possibilities, I will you might take a look at the chat. No, I think, Wolfram, this is a great opportunity to engage in an interaction, also to deepen discussions on China with German and European communities. I have two questions, Wolfram. On the one hand, what is your qualitative opinion regarding the German and European research on China? No? In Washington, D.C., and we are engaging in a dialogue with these so-called think tanks. I always say many times they are neither think nor tanks, but well, they are considered think tanks on China. We don't see these think tanks in Germany or in Europe. No, there are no counterparts on these topics, and surprisingly, the analysis and level of analysis on China in Germany and in Europe is much weaker than in other parts of the world. No, the question is why. This is very surprising given the importance of China in Germany and in Europe. And simply a second topic, I mean, there are dozens of topics we could discuss, but regarding this intra-industrial trades, no? While I agree that there is a potential for increasing intra-industrial trade, which means exporting and importing auto parts, no? What we're witnessing in the United States, Canada, and Latin America is, on the contrary, a widening in the gap. This is a lowering of intra-industrial trade between Latin America, the US, and Canada with China, no? Very different than with Germany and Europe. Which means at the end, if you want to, that the whole continent from Alaska to the Malvinas is exporting soya beans, and we are increasingly importing telecommunications. No? And so the gap is growing. Just some questions, and please look at the chat. No?
Yeah, my chat was empty because I restarted. Now I see only one, so no, two. I think that
I can help you if you want.
Yeah. I think that the chats have been gone while I was off.
I can help you.
Yeah, I have two now. I will go into it. But most interesting questions, I think, yes, it's interesting. If I look at the, not at the think tanks, but at the universities in the US, I see the best and most closest analysis and reports made on China are coming from some of the US universities. Look, Boston University has that Center of Global Development Policy. Yeah, the Global Development Policy Center. It does huge, big reports all the time on all aspects, green, ecology, finance of the Belt and Road. They do these regular social trust, general trust surveys, like the World Bank does in 130 countries anyway, in China. They do that. They have been doing that for decades. Also, Stanford University, together with University of San Diego, they do social trust studies in China. Most important. First-hand data, so to speak, for people like me. We do not have that simply from Europe nor from Germany. And you say it's an obvious contradiction. German companies are doing, the big corporations all doing, 40% like Volkswagen, 45% of their profits in China. Yeah, Siemens, SAP, Bosch, all the big names, and they don't care for a think tank. They have think tanks, and sometimes I think these think tanks are really tanks, brutal, which is in Berlin, a huge think tanks on China, which is but producing mainly ideology. It's kind of very aggressive studies, very much transatlantic oriented, support decoupling and all that. So I wonder, and in my books I describe how our societies are split up. Not only split up between capitalists and workers, between the social classes, but split up in a new way between the pragmatic capitalists, managers, small, medium-sized entrepreneurs who are in China, the engineers, technicians, etc., who have done jobs in China, return. I spoke to many dozens of them in the airplane, you know, flying to China and flying back to China, because you sit next to some people who just did their project there and return, etc. You speak to them in the hotel lobbies in China, etc., etc. And I reported much of them, and they say, look, we are split up we have come back from China with a completely different picture than we started going there. Okay, and then we return back, and we see that the Germans speak above China fact-free. Fact-free. They say, you know, I've heard that a lot of time, that they say, I look into my newspaper returning from China, and I see how they speak about China, and I see they know nothing about it. You know, my experience is the Chinese know 100 times more about Germany than the Germans about China. And so we are split, are splitted countries in Europe, at least in the EU, between the pragmatist economy people, corporate people, and a very aggressive political caste and media caste. And in between, we do not have a think tank, or we do not have universities like, say, Boston University, even MIT or San Diego University, who do real, serious, open-minded research about China. We don't have that. We have the few Confucius institutes. We have some few traditional sinology institutes. They are all under pressure to be closed down, you know, and that is a tragedy. Yeah, that is number one. Number two is intra-industrial trade. Yes, that was the ideal that capitalism at its best times had in the 60s and 70s, and that has gone down again through some deglobalization. In my last book, I have talked about very intensively about how endogenously the old style of globalization had tendencies to deglobalize again. And on top of that deglobalization, the political strategy of Washington changed in the 2010s or late 2000s, and went into a political decoupling and deglobalization. So what we have now is these falling back into crude old forms of division of labor, as you has described. The way out here is the only way out to cooperate with China in order to get Latin American countries, perhaps for the first time or for the first time after the 60s, I have no idea, get re-industrialized in a new way, like we see that in Africa. I have read a lot of McKinsey reports on Africa and other reports of people who have been there. There is something going on in that way, and for the first time, Africa is really truly getting industrialized, and that is probably the way in order to rebuild somehow from scratch a kind of re-globalization in order to get to a good form of intra-industrial trade.
Okay, thank you very much, Wolfram. Look, I will mention 3 or 4 questions, and you might pick the questions you wish. There are lots of questions. We can send you the questions at the end. No?
Yeah, now I see them.
There is one question of Jose Calderoni asking you what is your opinion of the military sector in China. And then another question by Javier Valdez regarding the increasing share of Chinese companies across the world, but also barriers in some countries, such as in the United States, to let Chinese firms in the stock exchange system, for example. No? And the third and final question regarding from Monica Unda Gutierrez regarding the social credit system in China, and if you have an opinion of pros and cons of such a system, no?
Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah, the military sector is of course crucial because if things are pushed that way still, and you still do not know what the Biden administration will do really, it always switches between no, we don't want to push war, and on the other hand, they do. You don't know. Look, very different signals from Blinken in an interview these days, and on the other hand, what in the G7? Who cares about G7 nowadays? Huh? G7, a huge, aggressive, serious declarations, etc., etc. So what they do, of course, I mean, NATO does military exercises all the time, every year in the South China Sea, of course, you know. So the US drives, they take the naval law and say we have the right to even with military ships go into 20 miles to the Chinese shores. I mean, I keep asking my American friends, what would you say if the Chinese Marine would come to Florida and make exercises in front of Florida or in front of San Francisco? What would you say? Yeah. Now, the point is, if we look at that thing, and economists and left-wingers and heterodox economists and all, we peace-friendly people, we do not like that. But now I decided 2 years ago to have big military, technical, military, industrial chapters in my book. You know, and my result is briefly China and Russia is a strategic military alliance now. Both are perfect. They have the leading technologies in defense technologies. The Russians have the S-500, S-600 systems. You know, in Syria, around 20% of all the French and British and US missiles came through, okay? All the others were cut off, okay? The Russians sell that to any country they want. The military structure, technological military structure of China is defensive basically too, has always been defensive in the sense that their missiles have a reach of 1,500 kilometers. Now a bit extended to 2,000 to 2,500 so that they can reach Guam, etc. Okay, they have presented for the first time intercontinental, some few intercontinental rockets at their 17th birthday, 2019, end of 2019. So for the first time there was a signal, look, we could even reach Washington. If you want, if you push it, we can reach Washington. Okay. The other hand is what they are strongest in, both the Russians and the Americans. And I checked dozens of military technical engineering websites. Okay. Open in the internet. You can, if you go into that and research, you can find things. They are in a speed area of 20-25 Mach. So these hypergliders that both the Russian and the Chinese have, they jump on the stratosphere, and they go straight down onto the aircraft carrier ships of the Americans in the South China Sea. Okay. That is a question of seconds. They are in the speed area of 20 Mach, 25 Mach, which means about 30,000 kilometers per hour, which means destroying one of the dinosaurs of the US, the proud of the USA, the 12, 13 aircraft carrier groups of ships, okay? They are all dinosaurs. They are all off within half an hour. Okay, The Americans know that. They know that because it's openly discussed at engineering pages in the USA. So I would say we have a new equilibrium of horror. What was it? There's a German term for that. Yeah, translated. I don't know if it makes sense to you. It's a new equilibrium. We had that equilibrium, atomic equilibrium, nuclear power equilibrium, or atomic bombs equilibrium between the Soviet Union and the US. That kept us for some decades, some kind of stability, so to speak. And my thesis is this is what we have again. It's too late for the US to dare to attack China, to attack Iran, to attack Russia. They cannot dare it if they have a rest of rationality in Washington and a rest of survival instinct. Then they won't do it. And there was reason why Trump in the last minute stopped the attack on China some years ago, 2 years ago, okay? That is my thing, saying militarily, we have a new equilibrium. No one can dare to attack the other in a real big hot war. No way. Hopefully, this gives us some stability. The second question was not quite clear to me. Stock exchange exclusion of Chinese firms, was it that? The Chinese firms excluded from stock exchanges in the US and Wall Street?
Simply the question, Wolfram, regarding the increasing share of Chinese firms in the world, no?
Yes,
in
okay.
different forms, but also barriers in some countries, such as the United States, specifically in the stock exchange, no?
Yeah. A number of Chinese firms have been excluded now from the stock exchange, which doesn't mean much because the U.S. banks all go to the Chinese stock exchanges now. You know, huge profit. I had several talks to financial investors from Frankfurt these days. Because they wanted to know something about China. And they told me, look, and I presented things to them, you know, things about China. They had a list of questions they had or themes I should talk about. And they wanted just to know about China. And they say, look, we see the American banks have a huge run on the stock exchanges in Shanghai and in Shenzhen and in Hong Kong. They make huge money now with selling Chinese funds and all that. And Alibaba, if you look at the Ant Group thing, a 37 billion IPO, initial public offering, was planned, but not for Wall Street. Not for Wall Street. It was planned in Shanghai and Shenzhen, right? With a secondary listing in Hong Kong. Okay, that is the trend. Who speaks about Wall Street? They cannot attract any more 100% of the surplus financial capital in the world. No, it's off, you know. But that doesn't solve any problem, but because the first part of the question is more important. I mean, we cannot let go a world and a world development where one country gets more powerful and more successful all the time, you know, while the West, still Germany, EU, still struggling with itself, right? But here is, you know, why does capitalism not take the hand that is stretched out to them, you know? It's all getting into China style, you know. We all are developing industrial policies now in Germany, in France, in the EU, huge programs, most of them with a protectionist a bias, so to speak, against China. China has 10% of foreign direct investment of the US in the EU. That is ridiculous. But anyway, I would say seeing the positive of that is they have to do China style in the sense of rethinking their state, going off from neoliberalism, from running down the state capacity. They reviving state capacity in terms of industrial policies. So if this goes the right way and capitalist societies start thinking about what they want to be and to do in 2030 and 2035 or 40, then we have a chance on an equal basis go into bargaining and long run reliable cooperation with China. You know, that is the point. And you can talk on anything. We have to talk on anything at one day if we will not just let all these global bad things and bad developments just spread. We cannot afford that anymore. We know that for climate change, but we have to do the same for trade structures, production structures, for division of labor, international division of labor, etc., etc. And the size of companies. It makes no sense that one day, just because the capitalism cannot make it anymore, China's companies will lead the Forbes list. You know, you have a majority of China companies in the Forbes list of the top 500 already, more than American firms. One day the top 500 would be Chinese firms. That doesn't make sense. No one does want that, you know. And I keep saying that in my books that China has no interest in an America, in the US, that is completely deindustrialized. But no one takes on the stretched out hand of China and says, okay, let's talk about it and let's get into a deal and let's make a global deal again, etc. That is this point. Social credit system, last question. Huge thing, very funny thing. I have a number of slides on that. The point is here, you must know first from where they came. You had the Wild East. You had 30 years of just letting go, and it led to a huge, huge, huge rundown of culture and behaviors and norms and standards. And if they wouldn't have stopped that, then China would have collapsed. It was a question of corruption. It was a question of criminality in the wild growing P2P credit and finance sectors. In the 2000s, they got a control of it. They legalized the P2P financial sector, which was a major source of criminality in China, real big, strong criminality. Not only financial criminality, but other criminality as well. They got a grip of it. They got control over it. You have now, since 2016, you have a unified, a legalized P2P financial sector. They got corruption under control. Corruption is hugely down. The individual behaviors of and these social credit systems address first politicians, second managers and entrepreneurs, third officials, and in the last instance only the individual and the private household is addressed. So that in 2014, as a part of corruption defeat, they had that frame decision in the government on social credit systems. And they thought that in 2020 they could introduce a unified national system. Now, this is completely off. Everyone is discussing these things. You have about 30 different local, city-wise, provincial-wide social credit systems, which is huge experimentalism. Everyone is discussing about what comes in, what we leave out, what are the weights of the different criteria, where are the thresholds where we start some punishing or some positive rewarding, what kinds of punishing, what kinds of rewards do we do, etc., etc. So in the 14th five-year plan, you see clearly no time point, no year of introducing a nationwide unified system, because it's all still in a huge experimental system. For instance, just recently it was decided health data of people will never ever come into any of the social credit systems. Yeah, and then you have a huge diversity of the social credit systems. Mostly financial seriosity is one criteria. If you serve your credits, it is always one criterion. But in some rural provinces, you have, for instance, a criterion visiting your old parents once a year. You have to visit your old parents once a year. If your parents are 60 or older, you have to visit them once a year. This is a funny thing. In other things like the social credit point system in Shanghai, you have a list of 20 dump separating criteria, and they have a huge social media discussion on that, where people say, hey, now we have to study chemistry or what, so it was too much. So it was reduced from originally 30 to now 12. So it's still going on, and interestingly, foreign firms say this all has led to an overall huge improvement of the behaviors of individuals as well. And it has nothing to do with suppression or control, because I know how Chinese talk about that, and they talk about that very relaxed and smiling, and say, look, and they show you your card, they put it into a box and say, look, I have 730 points of 1,000. So I'm quite fine. Everyone, if you ask your colleagues going over, they show you, what it was, how it is, how it works, and it works, of course, differently. So I see it in the sense not of the result, not of the result in the sense of one unique national system, but the way, the process, the discussion process is the goal in that sense, and the goal has, and that process has fulfilled a secondary goal already, in the sense that nowadays, if you as a pedestrian step on the street on the pedestrians crossing, I made that experience in 2014 when I was first time there. I thought, it's a pedestrian crossing, I can walk over. No one thought of stopping. No driver thought of stopping. I thought, no, be clear in your behavior. You just walk and look at them, and they will stop. One car, I was, touched by the car, who just, the guy just in the last second stopped. Otherwise, I would have been perhaps dead or what. I shouted, and people looked at me in 2014 like, this crazy foreigner, what is he doing? I just didn't want to be hunted across the street by the cars like all the other pedestrians, And I did this experiment, so to speak, every year since then, twice a year, so to speak. And it has completely changed, the same experiment in 2019, late 2019, November last time I was there. And, I did that at the same corner. And, it was like in the US, so defensive car driving, in the US, that you can walk, even if you have red signal, you can walk as a pedestrian. They stop. They wouldn't honk. They wouldn't shout. They just stop. And that was the same. They stopped 10 meters away, although 5 meters would have been sufficient for me, So it does something. And I think that the Chinese government has learned that the process is working beyond and below the level of the original idea of having one big national social credit system. It's more interesting to see the discussions going on and see what it affects with people than just stopping that and having one system. That is my view on the social credit systems.
Oh, thank you very much, Wolfram. Oh, there are lots of questions, as you are seeing. I would highlight and simply continuing some of the questions from the first to the
Yes,
last
please.
ones. Maybe three group of questions again, and maybe to start finishing. One by Agustin Rios regarding your opinion on the so-called trade war between the United States in China, and in general, the relationship with the United between both countries. What do you foresee in the short and medium term? No? One question then by Ambassador Eugenio Anguiano, your opinion regarding the high indebtedness of state-owned enterprises and the so-called zombie enterprises. What is your opinion on this? And finally,
could you repeat that, Enrique? Could you repeat that second?
Yes, the second one by Ambassador Eugenio Anguiano regarding the high indebtedness of state-owned enterprise and all this discussion on zombie enterprises. No? And the third question by Bruno Gandelgruber that's put us in touch, if we remember, regarding the issue of the social coherence in China, of less poverty, as you highlighted, but also increasing inequality in China, no?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the trade war for the US, it was a huge defeat. If you look at the studies, who had to pay the increased customs rate? The American consumer, because of the huge inelasticities of the American demand, both on the side of the companies who had to just are dependent on the parts they had to import from China, and the consumer products that the American consumer is and the American consumer is independent is dependent on the Chinese consumer products with a very low elasticity. So no way for the US economy to avoid that or to shift the weight of the costs of the increasing customs to China. China didn't bear it at all, more or less zero, and it was just in effect it was just a redistribution between the American consumer and the American Treasury. So a transfer of the American consumer to the Treasury. That is simple. It's obvious. So a huge dissuccess, a huge failure. Interesting. It's not quite clear what's going on between China and the US. I think Washington still is searching for its strategy. It's obvious that they more or less left everything that Trump had introduced, and they left it. The Biden administration left it, did not cancel it, and they tried to go on with that, with the new standard. And that is probably the new standard. On the other hand, and that standard is crushing on some Chinese firms. The ZTE case, you might remember, ZTE, the second largest mobile supplier, mobile telecommunication supplier after Huawei. They were more or less made dead. They were close to collapse. And if they had collapsed, they would have taken, I don't know, 40,000 or so American workplaces with them, you know. And that was the point where Trump said, no, we stop that, we postpone it. Otherwise, we cannot afford that 40,000 American high qualified workers will be dismissed, laid off. So it was always like in the case of ZTE, where they stopped in the last second, and ZTE is still living and doing well. Huawei is also doing well. despite the chip, the semiconductor shock that US did. You know, no semiconductors to Huawei, but Huawei is doing that themselves, and China is heavily producing these semiconductors now. So they weren't effective either in the Huawei case, nor in the ZTE case, nor in the TikTok case. Yeah, TikTok still existing, still having a huge user base in the US and worldwide. So they probably will not do anything on that. If you look at one of the last things, constructive things that Trump did, that was the phase one, so-called phase one trade agreement in January 20. January 20. That was a clear planning device, so to speak, between them and China, because he knew elections are coming. Okay, my people in the Midwest are suffering, you know, because China stopped buying soya beans, for instance, or wheat or so. Huh? They sourced elsewhere in the world. Huh? So Trump came up to China and say, let's make a deal. And if you look at this deal, it's a so detailed planning device, a planning deal where really capitalism said to you have to purchase from that area so many tons of this and that. Like I remembered in the early 80s when the Japanese came over with their new production forms, lean production in cars, then both US and EU stopped the train and said, no, we cannot, you know, import stop. Huh? And then an agreement between the EU and Japan was made, defining the exact number of cars that Japan may export in this year to France, in this year to Germany, in this year to Spain, etc., etc. So it was super planning. Was super planning economy. Huh? The Americans did it a bit different. They said either we stop importing any car of you, or you build production sites within America, within the US. So you see, in case when capitalism is with its back at the wall, then suddenly it is able to do very interesting things. And this is more or less China style, I would say. China had no problems in saying, yeah, well, okay, we buy soya again from the US. If you relieve the customs rates, we do that. Another thing is now the climate summit recently. I mean, look, it was important for Biden to have a good balance for his first 100 days. They made a huge firework of intentions and something that he did, symbolic things. He invited all the leaders of the world to a climate summit, etc. What did he say? He just explained intentions. You know, where you ask, hey, that you want to do, how does the US want to do that? Yeah, how do they want to get it? They didn't get it in the last decades. And if you look at it, she just sit there and said, look, these are the results of our 13th five-year plans, which are impressing. And these are our intentions until 25. And he just reported what the 15th four-year plan said. And then he talked about the plans they have until 2035. And that was it, you know. He just could say what they do anyway. Yeah, while the US said, yeah, well, we have these and these intentions. But the Western media turned the way around and said, well, look here, Biden, the new hero of the West, and he pushed China in climate change to reduce emissions, which was ridiculous. You know, if you know the facts behind that, it was ridiculous. They just turned it around. Okay. Now, indebtedness, yeah, a huge thing in China. You have a quite large indebtedness in private firms. This is quite high. You have a very low indebtedness in the central government, very low, 50% or so. They have increased that in their short Corona crisis last year. It went up a bit by 5% points. Now it's down again, etc. Also, they were already very successful in bringing down the indebtedness of the private corporations in China, but that was put up again a bit through the Corona crisis because they pushed economically and in central bank policies, of course, as all countries did. I would not speak of zombie enterprises in China. There are some, of course, and it comes up here and there, like these days. A big Chinese financial investor who has to pay back $3.5 billion within the next two months or so, and they said just that this morning. I read it. We will do it. We can do it, etc. Look, what all economists say, also critical American economists, they all say they have no indebtedness against the foreign countries. So they have full control of their currency and of their indebtedness. You have no dependence in trade. The trade surplus is, I don't know, 0.5% of the GDP. That's what they brought it down continuously over the last 10 years. The dependence on trade surplus with the US is ridiculously low, something far below 1% of GDP. And they have $3 trillion US dollars in their treasuries. Okay, so what could happen in case you have a financial crisis worldwide? China will be probably the only country that will survive it because they have a control over their foreign relation of their currency. They are not indebted to foreign countries, and they can control everything and help survive companies if they want in any way. They let, of course, companies go bankrupt if they have the analysis that these companies are not worth keeping. So it's not that any company is kept under any circumstances. Even state-owned enterprises can go bankrupt, and every now and then they let a state-owned company go bankrupt, but now they are all efficient and top of their sectors. Now, social coherence and inequality. Hello, Bruno. Bruno is a nice friend and colleague, and a fellow German, by the way. Southern also, not Austria, but Bavarian. So something not really German, he's Bavarian. Something different from the rest of Germany. Where's Bruno? I just saw him somewhere. Okay, social coherence. Yes, that is a thing where I have not really a final answer to. What I see is that inequality is about to being brought down. I looked at the Gini coefficient things. That is, of course, the crudest measure, the most aggregate measure. They were at 0.5. I told that 0.5 of income inequality. They brought it down to you get the figures only very late, only 2 years after GDP, for instance. You have the Gini coefficient data, income distribution data. It is down to something around 0.43 or so. I heard a keynote in late 2019 by the leading economist, government economist at a Tianjin Innovation Conference. And he said, our goal is a Gini coefficient of 0.32. No, he said, we bring it down, and at that point it was something, he used the number 47 or so, 0.47. He said, we bring it down by a third. and I counted for 8 or for 9, for 7, and I counted a third down would be something above 0.3. 0.31, 0.32 is the average of Europe, is something where Scandinavia is, Sweden today. Norway is far below that. This is in the high 20s. Denmark very equal, Finland very equal, etc. But average EU, which has the ex-socialist countries, which have still a very equal income and wealth distribution, and they bring the EU average down. But the EU average is 0.32, and there they want to be. What would that mean? I mean, concluding from such a high aggregate thing, first thing, to have this as a target measure is crazy already for an economist. That means you have to change the deep structure of billions and billions of interactions in order to bring an aggregate measure down by a third. So I would say they would take 20 years for that. The other hand is everyone is inequality. What is it? What is the term? Sorry, I have to translate in German. Aversion, I think, is the English term. The Chinese have an inequality aversion. They don't like a stretched car with black windows driving through the streets. They keep the thumb down to them. They don't like that. That means if you are, in terms of government policy, if you are on the so-called Hurun list, the list of the multimillionaires and billionaires, which is the kind of Forbes list in China, they have that. As soon as you are on it, you will be cited to the tax administration, and you have to explain where you got your money from in the last year. Okay, so this is kind of pressure on that. On the other hand, they will say, please use your profits in your company to invest here and there, to participate in building infrastructures there and there in the countryside or so. So that means not only from bringing poverty, abolish poverty, they bring up the more equality from below, not only by increasing wages hugely, not only by that incredible tax reform last year, where they relieved lower and middle labor incomes by 30 to 50%, early 2020. That all are factors, not only from below and from the middle, but also from cutting at the top. There will be a tendency towards more equality. Social coherence, I don't know. I see, of course, that there is a kind of elitist group still. I saw these young girls, 18, with huge amounts of money in super expensive department stores, all French little shops on Monday morning. They walked there, and obviously their father was a multimillionaire, and there were 100 of them in that morning, Monday morning, in that department store. You never know. I mean, richness reproduces richness, or even cumulatively tends towards more inequality. That is for sure a mechanism we know. On the other hand, they're pushing strongly against that. The outcome, except having the hard facts of the Gini coefficient going down slowly, I don't know. I see this and I see that, and I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that China will not survive or will not be able to carry on its intentions and system that it wants to go to with a huge inequality. That will not work. So it is, in one word, an open question to me at the moment. I see tendencies. I would tend to believe that they make it to prevent higher inequalities and increase social coherence. Yeah, but I will not tell you one word answer.
Okay, Wolfram, thank you very much for your very interesting comments, suggestions. I think this is a very interesting invitation to read your books, to read your analysis. There were some questions of where to find your books. I mean, you simply have to Google it, and probably some of them will be public, some of them we have to buy. I would invite
Enrique, both of them have Chinese licenses. So all of you who can read Chinese can purchase the Chinese editions. And those who can speak Serbian, there's a Serbian edition out.
Fantastic.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you all for your patience.
No,
I
remind everybody that we will upload the video, and Wolfram, I will remind you, if you allow us to upload your PowerPoint as a PDF file. There is always a lot of interest ex post on these presentations. So we will have these files in 24 hours, hopefully tomorrow. No?
Yeah.
There are still a lot of questions. I will send them to you, and you will see if you can respond them, which is a very positive sign. So we have not ended this discussion, but we simply started them with this discussion. Wolfram, I will close this a little bit. We usually finish at the latest at 12 o'clock Mexican time, no? And so I simply wanted to thank you very much again for your very interesting thoughts.
Thank you.
With a lot of possibilities of deepening each of these issues, from the social system to the WHO code to many questions. No, I also remind the people that are still with us to look into the earlier presentations. We have the videos and PowerPoints of lots of people, publications on some of these discussions. And so welcome to engage in the already existing debates and discussions. No? And Wolfram, I would say we are very much looking forward to improve this dialogue with your analysis and with other colleagues in Europe and Germany. No?
Yeah, we will keep in touch, and we will have we have a thread in hand on cooperation already. Huh? We will continue.
Very much looking forward to it. No?
Thank you, everybody.
Sorry for the questions. Again, I will leave the responsibility to Professor Elsner if he finds time to respond to
it. Yes, I will. Yeah, you send it to me and I will. Yeah, I will answer. Good.
Wolfram,
thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good night in Germany. We will.
Thank you. Have a good day over there. Bye-bye.
Exactly. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.